Уже баиньки пора уже. Ой, кто это? Кто здесь? Нет, это не надо так. Все нормально. Нет, не надо. Трёлот же. Это так всегда. Ладно. Пришло уже то время, дорогой человек. Нет, почему? Работать надо начать, понимаешь? Думаю. Чушь какую-то. Просто кого-то не пароли, знаете? Наоборот. Деньги где? Где работают?
Line Bioshock 2. This whole game, but specifically the opening level, is a masterstroke in auditory communication, even ignoring the characters who actually talk. The first and most obvious form of this is simply the environment of Rapture itself. A constant presence is the sound of gushing water and the creaking of scaffolding as the whole place falls apart. Rapture isn't just dying anymore, it's dead and decaying, as nature takes it back. A fact that's difficult to forget as this sound rarely, if ever, leaves completely. The presence of water also highlights something else, the way our character, Subject Alpha, moves. He's big, slow and heavy, causing massive crashes and splashes as he stomps through each level. This, combined with the weighty sounds of his primary melee attack, the drill, tells us that in comparison to in his weak swipes from the first game, we're playing as a creature of incredible power, and true to form, Bioshock 2 more aggressively focused game. It's not all power fantasy though. There's been a lot more care and attention put into how the sounds of
Ну чё? Ну чё, это самое? Окоченел уже. Чё ты?
Hey there, how's it going? Last weekend, myself and thousands of other game devs from around the world joined Ludum Dare 48. People keep saying that I have some sort of horrible game jam addiction. I mean, I don't really get it. This is only the 5th one I've done this year. Yes, I know it's only April, don't look at me in that tone of voice. Founded in 2002, Ludum Dare is an online community best known for the Ludum Dare game event. During Ludum Dare events, developers create games for a weekend. The jam, which
Да.
Is the
Is the capital of Great Britain? Нет? Манджары. Да, Манджары.
more restricted with the rule.
Очень горячий кипяток там. Знаете? Перед это. Ну и чё? Ну что дальше? Я не понимаю. Я про всех говорит, но вот нет этого. Тебе еще раз надо объяснить, что да. Да.
On their site, it says that
Это называется, да, понимаю, да, это просто же не будешь. Наоборот. Да, вот она это не видела.
in upload only get
Не надо так, это,
and on top
хорошо говорила, Ваня, просто.
for your game, the code, the art, the sound, the music, and finally you must.
Нет, наоборот, нет, понимаешь, ну нет, просто так уж, так вот.
I think it's one of the most visually.
Наоборот, значит, да. Слишком много, утырный. Ух ты, вот все идет. 18:50, 19. Bass. It's good. It's good. Ладно. Что там?
Already clicking on the view tells me that I should let you know to make sure to hit that subscribe button and don't forget to ring that bell. Ludum Dare uses themes suggested and chosen by the community. I missed the suggestion around this, which is kind of a bummer, but I spent a lot of time on stream doing the slot around, where everyone in the community can vote yes or no on every single theme suggested. There were 4,670 in total, and I actually went through all of them to give them yes or no's. After that, for 3 days, the top yes themes are voted on 16 at a time. Everyone in the community can give a +1, remain neutral, or give a -1 to each theme. On the 4th day, which is the day before the event starts, The top 16 suggestions from the previous 3 days are voted on one final time to get the final theme. I had a lot of fun with the lead up this time, and I really enjoyed the interaction that Ludum Dare is bringing to this process of voting and choosing themes. The event began for me on Friday, April 23rd at 6 p.m. my time. Now, I always have a little bit of a hiccup because on Fridays, I stream playtesting community games and giving feedback and suggestions, which most of the time ends around 5:30 p.m. So for today, I stayed a bit late to react and talk about the theme when it was announced. Of course, that also means that I'm going to be starting on the combo after streaming and critiquing for 6 hours straight, which may not have been my best choice.
Oh, here it is. The theme is deeper and deeper. That's one of the ones I picked. Let's hope I don't screw it up.
There's a running joke about Ludum Dare that the themes are just always bad and nobody ever likes them. This time, though, the theme that got chosen is actually one that I upvoted, so I can't really complain. I had a handful of ideas flooding my head right away, but I like to try to do something that's a little off the beaten path, because I figured that if I came up with something immediately, a lot of other people will also. I'm expecting that there are going to be a lot of digging and fishing games, so I decided that I wasn't going to do either of those. Every so often, I enjoy the challenge of making games in 3 hours live on stream. These little challenges let me test out mechanics that I have in mind to see if it's fun at all. In my last Ludum Dare game, I pulled the concept from a 3-hour game that I made and turned it into orbital defense. Since that worked pretty well last time, I decided to go back to my challenge games and check out some of my older ones to see if I had any other mechanics that I'd want to explore further. Pretty quickly, I found this game that I made called... Yes, that's how you say it. Which I made because I always mentioned floaty jumps in platformers, and I was challenged to try and design a game with a floaty jump. I ended up making this game where the gravity is incredibly low, so the jump is very, very floaty. It really turned into a jetpack burst that you can do as many times as you want, but it still kind of counts, right? I also give the player a down burst to be able to control and correct a little bit. As I was replaying it for the first time in months, I really enjoyed the movement a lot. And for me, in the way I make games, that's one of the aspects that I try to focus on the most. So I started off concepting ideas that could use this mechanic. My initial concept was to have the player exploring an abandoned mine that's set on an asteroid. So with a bit of an idea in place, I immediately began to overscope my project. I wanted collectibles, I wanted a shop, I wanted multiple alien enemies, I wanted a big, large map, and I even decided, oh, we should have a boss too, because that's never backfired on me before. I'm not sure why, but I've been overscoping my designs for the time that I have more than usual lately. Guess I'm just getting excited? I don't know. I need to get back to being much more thoughtful about planning in the beginning before I start moving forward. But of course, past me cared for none of this. I began to recreate and refine the movement from the initial inspiration game. I used what I had previously made as a guide, but the code for it was kind of janky, so I remade the whole thing just to make it feel and move a lot better. I've talked about this before, but for me, one of the biggest moments when making a game where everything clicks is when I keep hitting the play button to test out the game that I'm making, when I didn't make any changes to the code. I just played it, tested it, closed it, and then clicked it again to try it more. I was finding that I was really enjoying this movement that I created, and I just wanted to keep playing with it. You can control the left and right movement as you would expect, like a platformer. Just hold down the button and you move left and right. But the up and down movement are set to burst, so you can't just go up a little. You would need to fall a bit and then burst yourself up to the height that you need, leading to some pretty interesting ideas for level designs and just movement options in general. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The first thing I did was get the movement in and then add in some of the ancillary items that I knew I was going to need. I added in a set of collectibles that will magnet themselves to the player if you're near them, but if the player moves too far away too quickly, they'll actually stop. Since the game will be focused on movement, this will force the player to be in control a lot more to collect the items, but they don't have to be so precise that they can't collect them if they're not immediately on top of them. Just because it was feeling a bit bland, I gave the player some particle effects that just made me happy, and I just wanted them in. I added a projectile weapon to the player that's intended to be an electric bolt with multiple uses. The current thinking is to have it do things like stunning enemies or activate doors or checkpoints. At this point, it's 1 a.m. and I'm beat, so off to bed to hopefully have a much more productive day tomorrow. On Saturday, I got off to a slow start, and by slow, I mean I didn't start working until about 1 p.m. I did a weekend stream because everyone in the community wanted to see my working process, and it was just fun to hang out with everyone while I worked. I added in doors that are connected up to buttons, so you shoot the button and the door opens. I also added in enemies that'll move in different directions until they're shot, in which case they'll stay stationary for a couple of seconds. I wanted the enemies to be more obstacles that you maneuver around, as opposed to something you have to fight, so they can't be killed and only temporarily stopped. At this point, I had a lot of my core mechanics in, so it's time to figure out what this game is actually going to look like. I grabbed a color palette from lowspec.com like always. This time, I'm using the Hept 32 palette made by Endiska. I made a list of all the assets that I know I was going to need, and got to work trying to figure out what the player character is going to look like. To pay homage to the inspiration game, I made a little space person with a big blaster and a jetpack. The doors and button art came together fairly easily, they're not that complicated. Next up was trying to figure out what the aliens were supposed to look like. Since they're meant to be more obstacles and just exist in the level and not attack the player directly, I started with the concept of jellyfish as a base. Since jellyfish are dangerous in real life, but only if you collide with them. So, roundy, tentacly aliens, that sounds good to me. I hooked a big ol' eye on there for good measure, and I think it came out pretty good. For the second enemy, I wanted them to act more as a gate by shooting projectiles up and below that the player couldn't pass unless they stunned them. So I modified the first alien to give them little blasters, and it ends up kind of looking like an unknown for Pokemon, which I'm not really that mad about. I couldn't figure out what I wanted the projectiles coming from this enemy to look like, and then in the end I decided to make them look like little versions of the enemies that it just fires out because it looked kind of cute. Now I have to figure out how the rest of the game is going to look. Terrain and backgrounds are not my strong point in art, but over the next couple hours I was able to put together a mock-up of what I think it should all look like when it all comes together. The rest of the stream was spent animating the art and adding it into the game. After the stream, I began the tedious task of creating a tile map and drawing out a single proof of concept level. I tried a new technique with the background. Aside from the parallaxing stars, I added in some rocky textures that use some pattern effects from Photoshop, and then added that to the parallaxing effect to make it look like you're in an old, hollowed-out, abandoned mine. It was at this point that I came to the hard realization that I was not going to be able to make the large, explorable map that I was hoping for. And the boss as well in the shop, yeah, I had to cut a whole bunch of stuff here. So utilizing everything that I already had made, I reworked the concept into a speedrunning trials type game, where the player will need to complete the level, and their best times will be saved to try and beat in the future. And the rest of the night was spent adding everything I was going to need to track all of the saving of everything. I'll be storing 3 things per level. If the level has been
О, как все вообще тут. Я понял, что себе так не понял. Я тебя понимаю, что же как я не найти? Заваркины дети, ах, товарищи, компьютер. Парадокс. Какой говорит, что здесь? Зачем Шекспира говорит, что? нет. А тянор разгадывает. Согласись, что ли? Да, понял. Ну нет, извини. Ладно, что ты мне я понял. Ну хорошо, ничего ты не умеешь. Все нормально. Никто не знает.
Everything that I already had good me. I hooked a big old eye on there for good measure, and I think it came out pretty good. For the second enemy, I wanted him to act more as a gate by shooting projectiles up and below that the player couldn't pass unless they stunned them. So I modified the first alien to give them little blasters, and it ends up kind of looking like an unknown for Pokemon, which I'm not really that mad about. I couldn't figure out what I wanted the projectiles coming from this enemy to look like, and then in the end I decided to make them look like little versions of the enemies that it just fires out because they look kind of cute. Now I have to figure out how the rest of the game is going to work. Terrain and backgrounds are not my strong point in art, but over the next couple hours I was able to put together a mock-up of what I think it should all look like when it all comes together. The rest of the stream was spent animating the art and adding it into the game. After the stream, I began the tedious task of creating a tile map and drawing out a single proof of concept level. I tried a new technique with the background. Aside from the parallaxing stars, I added in some rocky textures that use some pattern effects from Photoshop, and then added that to the parallaxing effect to make it look like you're in an old, hollowed-out, abandoned mine. It was at this point that I came to the hard realization that I was not going to be able to make the large, explorable map that I was hoping for. And the boss as well in the shop, yeah, I had to cut a whole bunch of stuff here. So utilizing everything that I already had made, I reworked the concept into a speedrunning time trials type game, where the player will need to complete the level, and their best times will be saved to try and beat in the future. And the rest of the night was spent adding everything I was going to need to track all of the saving of everything. I'll be sorting 3 things per level: if the level has been completed at all, the time it was completed if you collected all of the pickups, which I'm calling scrap, and the time it took to complete with any number of scrap. Basically, I'm storing a best time for any percent and 100% of each level. After setting up all the local storage calls, I got the core of the menus and level select screens in so I could test them and make sure that they were working. Then I headed to bed early with only 14 hours left in the compo. The next day I began with sound. According to the compo rules, content generators are allowed and encouraged. I used SFXR to make the sound effects for the game. I honestly have no idea what any of these sliders actually do. Audio is not something that I've really studied at all. So I used the presets and random buttons to make noises until I hear something that I think will work, and then I just import that into the game. This took a while, but with the sound effects in, it's time to start dealing with the things that past me has left the future me to deal with. I say it quite often, but past me is a real jerk, leaving me all of the hardest stuff to do now. I had to finish making and animating all of the art that was still missing. Then, with less than 4 hours left, I really needed to figure out some level design, which actually takes a good amount of time, so I had to get moving. Placing every tile by hand is super tedious. There is an auto tile brushing construct that I just haven't figured out how to properly use. In the past, it hasn't been a huge issue, but this game made me realize that I need to prioritize learning that soon, because this is absolutely brutal. I made fairly large levels that have you descending deeper and deeper down to be able to make it to the goal. I knew I wouldn't have any time for revisions, so I tried to make sure that all the hallways and passages were large enough to keep the difficulty to a minimum. Again, I didn't have a whole lot of time for all of this, so I had to do it quick, and I just focused on giving the player a lot of twists and turns to navigate through, and then added enemies to the straightaway sections. I had planned for 5 levels, but after finishing the 4th, it was already 5 p.m. and I still had a bunch more to do. Did I mention the compo ends at 6 p.m.? This is when the panic really set in, because I still didn't have music or menus. I said earlier that I'm bad with audio, and that's even more apparent when it comes to music. Usually, I use music from sound libraries that I've purchased from Humble Bundles and other places over the years. But but that's not going to work for compo. I bashed my head against beatbox for a little bit, but couldn't come up with anything that even sounded halfway decent. Again, the rules say that you can use content generators. So I found a site that does AI generated music, and then it lets you edit the individual samples once it's been generated. So I made a bunch of adjustments to the song. Not really what I wanted to do, but sometimes you just gotta do what you have to. Unfortunately, I spent all of my time trying to get the music figured out that now it was 6 p.m. Thankfully, Ludum Dare has made a bunch of adjustments and come up with anything that even sounded halfway decent. Again, the rules say that you can use content generators. So I found a site that does AI generated music, and then it lets you edit the individual samples once it's been generated. So I did that, made a bunch of adjustments to the song. Not really what I wanted to do, but sometimes you just gotta do what you have to. Unfortunately, I spent all of my time trying to get the music figured out that now it was 6 p.m. Thankfully, Ludum Dare has a 1-hour upload period after the jam time has expired. This gives everyone an extra hour to be able to finish up, export, and upload their projects. I used the first 30 minutes of my extra time to finish up menus, and then the remaining time to test my exports as much as I could, because no matter what, I always find issues and I need to re-export a couple of times. I was able to upload the game to itch and went to fill out the game submission form on the Ludum Dare page. With about 3 minutes left, I filled out the form, and here's where I almost made a huge mistake. Here, I'm filling out the bottom of the page, and I clicked the compo button. I didn't see anything else to fill out, so I figured the page would just switch over and lock you in if you have compo selected when the time comes up. So I switched out and started uploading the download build, so there's more than just the HTML5 version if people wanted it. While they uploaded, I switched back to the form just to take a look again. Then I scrolled up and my heart fell in my butt. There's a publish button at the top of the page that doesn't show up until you select either jam or compo at the bottom. If I can draw your attention to the timer, I am so lucky that I switched over when I did. I panicked, saved the page, and clicked submit with 6 seconds left on the timer. Damn near giving myself a heart attack and dumbfounded at the luck that I checked the page at the exact moment that I did. Now, this is my fault for pushing it so late into the submission hour, but I do think that a button at the top of the page that doesn't exist until you press the button at the bottom of the page is a bit confusing on UX and UI. I tweeted my brush with failure, and Mike, the person that runs Ludum Dare, commented that they should probably fix that, which I do think would be helpful. Again, it's my fault for pushing it so late and not double checking, but I appreciate that Mike sees the possibility for confusion and wants to do something about it. With my heart racing and my blood pressure through the roof, I calmed down to set up the itch page and start doing screenshots and all that. So after 48 crazy hours, this is